So if I can do it, anybody can do it. Again, just pick that one or two things that are important to you, things that you think you're gonna like. Because again, like I didn't visit any place. Honestly, the closest I'd been to a goat. I mean, goats were at a petting zoo, like at the Missouri State Fair. Like I didn't have any
Sure.
experience with goats. I didn't have zero animal husbandry experience. I helped with sheep. When I was a kid, we would round them up and hold them for a sheep shear. So I mean a little bit of exposure, but nothing. I mean I didn't grow up around it. Those were
You'd see him at the
all
state fair and be like, "Whoa,
yeah
those are huge balls."
right.
This is the Farm Hop Life podcast. I'm Matt DeRozier. Today, my guest is Josiah Young of Over the Moon near Kansas City, Missouri. Let's find out what got him into growing his own food. How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. Thank you very much. So, I saw a little quote on your Twitter, and I thought that was interesting. You said, "I'm not an expert in much, but learning by doing." What did you What did you mean by that? I think we can all take a guess, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
So I'm much like a lot of people that kind of get into living in the country and doing things. I did not really grow up. I grew up on a little bit of land, but I didn't really grow up doing any of these things. And it's kind of hard to find people that do. And so a lot of times, I just had to go out there and do stuff in order to learn how to do it. I'm really good at failing forward. I do that
I like
professionally, and
that.
I do that personally. So it's just learning. It's just and being completely unwilling to pay anybody or do any of those things.
Right.
Have anybody else do it. I just do it myself. I kind of got that from my dad in the 22 years that I lived at home. I never saw him pay anybody to do anything. He just learned. He
Wow.
learned everything, did it all himself, built his own house, the works. So
Still standing, I hope.
yeah, he's actually that's he built a geodesic dome back in
Oh,
the
cool.
early 80s. So any of my eccentricities probably come from my father. He's an odd duck, but yeah, so that he built his own dome. He and my mom did all by themselves. They had some
That's
friends help, but
crazy.
otherwise he did it all. So I kind of get all that from him. So
That's cool. The out of the box type of stuff like that. That's I, I like alternative building methods. I think they're pretty neat. Um, like Adobe, Cobb, Hempcrete, Rammed Earth, like all that stuff, Earth Bag. Like I don't know. It's different.
well,
And
the unfortunate thing is that if my since my dad did that, I have to do something crazy too. I can't let my dad one
you
up
got to
me. So
one up him.
yeah, I've gotta do something out of the box. I'm
Got
not
to
sure my
go
wife is a fan,
underground.
but I actually we had some friends when I was a kid that had a fully underground house, and it was pretty cool. So
That is pretty cool. So how did you get started homesteading? You don't call yourself a homesteader. You just make food for yourself, I guess, is what you do.
yeah, I think slapping a label on it makes it sound like it's not normal. And for me, this is just me. This is just what I wanted to do. It used to be normal. So why slap a label on something that was normal 100 years ago, 150 years ago, whatever.
That's a good point.
People raise their own food, and that's just what I want to do. And if I can make money off of it, or if I can turn it into a side hustle or whatever that looks like, that's what we'll do. But I don't like the label in general. It's just what Josiah wanted to do basically. But really, it kind of stems from growing up. I grew up on a little bit of land. My parents, they tried to split between living a city life to some degree, I guess, or maybe not a city, a normie life, normal life, and living on land and doing stuff with it. I mean, I grew up in a dome. I mean, that's pretty odd. Um, but that's kind of where it started. Is that idea that I could, we had a garden, we had chickens, we didn't do anything crazy. We lived aside from living in a dome. I mean, we lived a pretty average life. Um, but I knew I wanted property, and so it took a while. We lived in an apartment for 5 years, and then lived in a house in Kansas City for 2 years. And the market went nuts, and we got out of there. Sold out and moved on to our current property.
Recently?
Well, it's been 5 years. It'll be 5 years
Okay.
in August. So anyways, why that changed, I guess early on, I would probably have just been happy to have a little garden and that be that. Somebody gave me a Joel Salatin book. I don't even remember who it was. Um, and I guess subverted me, converted me, however you wanna look at that.
Right.
But they gave me a Joel Salatin book, and I was intrigued. I had never really thought about it. I didn't really care much about. I still don't. I drink Mountain Dew. I'm not particularly. I mean, I'm a pretty normal when it comes to some diet. I mean, you can see the pantry behind me. Um, but it got me intrigued by all that, and so I started looking into what I wanted to do while we were still living in that house in the city. And when we moved up here, I jumped in with both feet. Probably too much to be truthful. It was a little too much. We did everything all at once that first year or two. So yeah,
So
that's
let's
pretty much the origin story.
so let's I'm gonna go out of order here a little bit.
Oh, you're fine.
So your first year, what did you try to do in that first year? That was a little too much. First year or two.
Big old garden. We took what my parents had done, and I said I can do it better than my parents, and I think it was probably 3 times the size of my parents. Um, on top of that, my wife was well, we had two of our kids. I think she was pregnant with the third, the first growing year we had. So we moved in the fall, so I had a little bit of time to kind of get acquainted with everything. But we did a huge garden. We bought chickens. We did pigs, and we got our first goats, all in that first
Wow.
365 days. Um, and it was a bit nuts. I bit off more than I could chew. And I was still commuting at the time. So we live about an hour north of Kansas City. So I was still driving 2 hours a day, round trip, and
Wow.
it was too much. And my wife was actually working a little bit at the time too. So we would go in together. We would be down in the town for 12, 14 hours with kids. It was miserable. It was absolutely miserable. Way too much. But again, learn by doing. I didn't know I didn't know that was
Failing
all it was
forward.
gonna take. Yeah. And I mean I did. We learned what we could accomplish with all that. We learned how to be more efficient with time.
Sure.
That's what I do with my day job is work on efficiencies, and so that was something I had to learn is like I have to be better. I have to be more efficient about it. But anyways,
Um, do you have any um like automation set up on your homestead then to like kind of improve efficiencies?
that's something that's actually coming kind of this year. Previously we had really lousy internet,
Hmm.
and I didn't really want to go down the whole networking my stuff or doing any of that stuff if I wasn't going to be able to monitor it when I was gone. And we didn't really
Sure.
have the bandwidth to do it. I'm talking like 2 or 3 megabytes down, one up, kind of it was bad. I actually worked
Sure.
from home for about a year and a half that way. It was pretty miserable. Um, but that's something we're looking into this year. We're talking about putting some cameras up in the goat barn that we're going to be working on building this year, and doing a little bit of that kind of stuff, monitoring, checking temperatures, more of that kind of stuff. As far as other automation, I have a bunch of alarms for freezers for the root cellar, chicken houses, that kind of thing, just to kind of keep an eye on things. I don't necessarily automate any of those things, but I get an alert if the temperatures past a certain point or whatever. Thus far, we really haven't. I mean, other than that, I don't know that there'd be a lot of stuff. I go out there and I check on the animals in the morning. So I mean,
Right.
opening and shutting it's not a huge deal. And I work from home. If I was still driving in, I probably would have to automate some more to make my life and my wife's life a little easier, but
Yeah.
not currently. So
I was just curious because it's been something I've been thinking about here. Like, okay, like if I set up like an Arduino or something like that, or one of the other 100 options I'm sure there are now. Like, I talked to a couple that have like one of those sun up to sundown, like automatic chicken coop doors, but they're like $175 a piece. And I'm like, man, that's kind of just to go open a door. I feel like I could just go do that manually. Um, but hey, whatever they want to do, right? So,
yeah, I mean that some of my concerns with those things is, with animals, weird stuff happens. And that's, I
it
think, one of the
does.
things. I mean, I posted, it was probably a month ago, like an average time that it takes for me to take care of the goats, and that doesn't really take into consideration the time the goat like rams through the door and disappears on you, or when a possum gets into your chicken house and your chickens are all roosting outside. Um, because they're terrified, and the possum's just in there eating eggs. Like, if the
Yeah.
door closes, I don't, so I'm gonna go check anyway. So I don't know how much that automation would help me. We free range our birds, so some of that I just don't. I mean, I wouldn't say that I don't necessarily trust it. I just know, like, we've had enough things go wrong.
Right.
I don't know that I would ever trust it, and I'm the kind of guy that I'll wake up at 2 in the morning and wonder if I closed the chicken house. So my mileage may be a little different than someone else's.
No, I get it. I mean, the automation sounds nice, but like, do I really want to run the risk of it failing on me? And then it was like, okay, then was it all worth it? If you have a poor connection to start with, you're kind of like, eh. And then, okay, for some reason, this stopped working. And I thought it was still working. Now, something as simple as like the GFI tripped on the outside of my house and the water froze up for the chickens or whatever. I went out there. I'm like, oh my gosh, like the water just froze up solid. And so I'm like, I had somewhere to be that morning, scrambling to get the bucket thawed out and come up with like plan B while that's thawing out. And I'm like, man, is it gonna get above freezing today? I mean, if I put in warm water, it should be good all day. I like, and then all because of GFI tripped. That's a pretty
Yeah,
basic thing.
yeah.
And you're not trying to have it connected to the internet and back and all this stuff. So
And I work IT. I mean, it's not technically a traditional IT job, but I see even stupid simple things fail for the
yep.
dumbest reasons. And so I think it's funny. Me and several of my IT coworkers, we talk about how, despite the fact that we're probably the most capable of getting these things working, we're also the least likely to do it. Like, a lot of the people that I work with, they have a lot of smart things in their house. I don't know that anybody in my IT department has a smart house or anything like that, because
Right.
I just know, and it's not that it's necessarily a bad thing to do, just leery because I see stupid things go wrong. So
No, I
that's one of
agree.
the other reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I'm an electrician, and sometimes we run Cat 6 cable. Well, if it's twisted slightly, because Cat 6 is very picky, it fails the test. And so, I mean, something as simple as that. And personally, like, I just have like a couple switches that turn lights on and off, and it doesn't always work. Or like the like a Nest doorbell camera, because my wife likes to see who's at the front door before she goes to the door, and those things again doesn't always work. So just as you add complexity, it's just gonna go haywire and go wrong. So I thought, I didn't ask directly, but I had a feeling that you were in IT based on some of your responses when we were messaging each other. So I guess I was right.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
what motivates you to grow your own food?
You know, I guess there's a couple things. a lot of it is for the kids, I think. It's kind of the cliche about like I want them to know where the food comes from. Um, I also really want them to have responsibilities that are important. So that was a big thing. Like I said earlier, I'm not necessarily I we don't spray anything. We don't I mean, we're fairly organic, I guess you could say, when it comes to what we grow. But it's not for any kind of I mean, I'm pretty pragmatic about it, realistically, I guess. The most important goal is to put food on the table, and then after that, I can start with being dogmatic about how I do it. With the realization that I'm using less chemicals or I'm, treating the animal better along the way. But ultimately, aside from all those things, at the end of the day, it's food security.
Right.
Is kind of the big one of late. Um, I was concerned, especially geopolitically. So I work in import export for an import export company, and so I see how tenuous some of those connections are, how complicated some of those things are, and so even prior to Corona, knowing just how what a delicate dance it is to make sure that we have food on our shelves, and when Corona happened and it made it abundantly clear um, that there wasn't much difference between full shelves and empty shelves. That was kind of a big moment for me and kind of kicking it, I guess, a little into overdrive in terms of, being able to produce and maybe even saying, turn it into a real, you could side hustle, a real farm, however you want to phrase that. We had been given a bunch of chickens. So when Corona really first hit, we were selling 20 some dozen eggs a week because people couldn't get eggs. So we would just make once a week trip into Kansas City and
Did you say
sell
20 dozen?
them.
Wow. Good for you.
So yeah, we have, so now at the time, I think we had about 50 hens. Um, we have about 40 now, but um, so we were selling eggs, and that was kind of, I mean, we were more than paying for chicken feed at the time. It was before feed costs went up. And I realized item one, I can make kind of a side hustle. And item two, there's clearly a need for me to be able to do some of this. We live pretty far away from a grocery store. Being self-sufficient when it came to eggs and when it came to dairy, it was a big deal. There wasn't a lot of milk on the shelves at the time. So it kind of changed things for us in terms of urgency. I think we kicked it up a notch in terms of whether, how quickly we could. Self-reliant isn't really an accurate word. The way I see it is most people look at homesteading as like a horizontal monopoly. You want to like take care of everything across the whole, all your veggies, all your meat, all your dairy, all that stuff. And I think it's probably a lot more accurate historically as well as realistically to look at it in vertical monopolies. I want like the goats. We still import. We still buy hay, but if I can make it so that I run the whole goat chain, we have a buck or 2 bucks.
Mm-hmm.
We do all the breeding. We cut all the hay here. If I can run that whole operation, then I am completely resilient in that way.
Yeah.
And that means I can barter those things for anything else that I need because no man's an island. And so for me, that the food security ultimately was what it came down to. I'm kind of rambling there off the question there, but
No, it's
food security was what it's all about. So at the end of the day,
are your goats for meat or for milk?
they're mostly for milk. Um, we had it was another one of my homesteading mistakes, I guess you could call it. The first year we were here, we had a friend of mine. He had a bunch of Boer Kiko goats. Um, he brought
I've
up
never
and we
heard of
used
that
them.
breed before.
It's a cross. They're Boer slash Kiko.
Oh, okay.
They're
Still
big
haven't
old
heard of
meat.
that before.
Okay. That's to my recollection. They're big
Okay.
old meat goats. It wasn't something we were particularly interested in, but he brought them in and ran them in our pasture. Our pasture was hideously overgrown. The previous owner, maybe even previous owners, had never taken care of it. So he ran those goats. Well, he had 2 extra bucks that he didn't want anymore, and so he just gave them to us. So we slaughtered them about a month after we had them, and put them in the freezer. And my wife, it turns out, she's not a fan of the taste of bucky goat. I guess basically is what you could call it. They were not weathered; they
Hmm.
were real bucks.
Sure.
I didn't think it was so different from a buck deer. I've shot bucks
Really?
before.
Okay.
We've eaten them. I didn't notice. I mean, it was a little gamier. It wasn't my favorite, but it was protein. My wife's not a fan,
Sure.
so we haven't had goats since. Um, Basically, she tells me that if push came to shove, we could eat the goats, but we've also been able to sell all of the little bucklings every time.
Wow.
So I mean, it's not a huge income stream, but it's a little bit of money. And thus far, that's her impetus for selling them. She gets on Craigslist right away and lists them because if we keep them, I'm going to eat them. So she has a reason to list them. But
That's
they're
funny.
milk goats. We have all of them but one are Nigerian dwarf goats.
Okay.
So they're not very big. They're kind of
Mhm.
perfect. I know lots of people have different feelings on the matter, but for me, they're cheap. At least locally, you can get a doe for 150 bucks. I'm not talking
Very
paper.
common. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're 150 bucks here. You can get a buck for 75 bucks, um, and you can throw them in the back of a van. And at the same time,
Sure.
the math. It sounds horrible, but the math is, if I lose a goat, it's not a huge deal. I mean, it's awful. Don't get me wrong. I don't. Nobody likes losing animals, but if something goes wrong, I have 14 other goats out there.
Sure.
I can't. We don't have the land. We have 21 acres, and about half of it we use for the homestead per se. So I don't have enough land to really run a fully contained cow herd. But goats let us run a lot of animals, potentially run a couple bucks, and keep the genetics, clean. Um, but they're small, easy to handle. Like I said, you can throw them in a minivan, and having a bunch of them means the milk supply is a lot more resilient than just the one dairy cow or 2
Right.
dairy cows or however many I could realistically handle here, which is why we did it that way. So it works for us.
Good. How much does a goat buckling, I guess, go for on
So we've been
Craigslist?
selling ours for about $75 a piece. So
Oh,
it's not
nice.
it's not bad. We've never sold a doeling. We're still kind of growing. We're still trying to figure out, like I was talking about with a vertical monopoly, we're still trying to figure out how many does we'd need in milk to provide butter, yogurt, um, the fresh milk, ice cream every now and again, that kind of thing.
Sure.
We're not quite there yet, but most of our does, I think we're milking 3 right now, and I think we have 2 more that'll wean off here in a little bit, and then we have 4 more that are bred. So potentially we could find out this summer exactly how many goats a family of 7 would need to keep us fully in dairy. So we'll
So
find
then
out.
how many gallons are you getting a day?
We get a quart per goat per day on average.
Okay.
Um, right now is probably a terrible time to kind of spout that number off simply because they're on hay. Um, it's good hay. I mean, we feed them alfalfa, but um, usually that first flush of grass, they really start producing. And obviously it ebbs and flows based on how long it's been since they've been freshened. But that's the average for the little goats. We have one
Okay.
that's she's half Nubian, and she produces a lot. She produces more than a quart a day, but that's pretty much it. So
Nice.
they're pretty economical overall.
Did you say that you have pigs too?
We had pigs.
Had
Um,
pigs. Okay, I didn't know if you
so
still had them.
that first year we had them. I had one. I don't. It didn't make a whole lot of financial sense. We processed them all ourselves. Um,
That sounds like a lot of work.
it was. We had two. My wife's cousin lives pretty close to us, and so he basically paid for me to care for one of the pigs. It was a lot of work. Um, and then we hadn't really been connected in the community very well. There's some opportunities now to I posted about it on Twitter, but we picked up a bunch of down corn, and I think if you can make some of those things work for you, then maybe you could make it make sense. But it didn't really make a whole. It didn't end up. The math didn't work out very well for us.
Okay.
I'd probably try it again with maybe a bigger pen and maybe with some of the connections I have now and some abilities to kind of scavenge food. But at the time, the math didn't make sense, and one of them got pretty aggressive towards the end.
Hmm.
So I have little kids. I basically said, you know what? Well, I'm not going to worry about pigs until either I can get a better setup, the kids are bigger, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I love bacon. I love sausage. So someday we'll probably end up doing it, but it'd have
Sure.
to be a
Yeah.
different setup. So
Gotcha. So you said that you've got that you were gifted a Joel Salatin book. Do you remember which one it was?
Um, I could probably look.
I
It's
was just curious.
one of them was Everything I Want to Do is Illegal, I think. Um, because it's funny that if the guy that gave it to me, I don't think he was particularly food. I think he was more just a libertarian bent, like he just hated the government intervention. So that's the reason he gave it to me. But I got curious, and I think I picked up a couple more of his books. I
Sure.
forget. There's two others that I really liked by him. But yeah, I think it was Everything I Want to Do is Illegal, or whatever that one's called. So
What's funny about that book is like I will when it get sometimes it like makes its way across like the internet or whatever every now and then, and like I always see it just the book title but never the author. And I'm like, will you at least give credit where credit's due? Like, come on, that's kind of a dick move.
yeah, I
Um,
agree.
so the reason I ask about the books is I was just curious what methods or techniques, practices that you've got on your farm, like rotational grazing or paddock shifting or something.
So we have I forget how many links of Premier One electric netting that we use for the goats. I think it's 300 total feet, but we run that in the yard a lot. Um, Basically, we move it. I hate mowing. It was one of the things when I moved to the country, I told my wife that I wasn't going to mow. Item one, I don't want to be one of those guys that bought 5 acres and mowed, and that's all he did. Like that just seems silly.
Same. It's stupid.
So I'm glad that's good to hear. So I have a lot more than that. I didn't want to mow 20 acres either. But I did not want to mow. So that was one of the reasons we got the electric fencing. And so we rotate them through the yard, and then we have two paddocks that we put up with basically scavenged chain link. We had a guy, he let me tear down all of his chain link that we put up. That equaled about a half an acre, which worked pretty well.
That's pretty
Um,
cool.
until the goat herd basically doubled last year, and so we've been putting in basically acre paddocks, um, and then hopefully as we grow with that and as we put some more in, we'll end up dividing them a little more. I can't really right now because they're not cleared enough. It would be a nightmare to get them a little more subdivided. I'd love to get them into half acre, even quarter acre within those hardwired, permanent fences and kind of rotate them through. But basically, the setup is going to be pretty rotational. Um, we'll have a barn as basically the spoke of the wheel, and then we'll just have paddocks coming off of each, in each direction. And I think
That's pretty sweet. That sounds cool.
it basically the goal, and it goes back to the efficiency thing.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of intensively rotating, but I could call it efficiency. Really, it's lazy. I don't want to have to go out there and be moving and juggling things all the time. Maybe when the kids are older, that could be a chore for them. But for now, I don't want to have to mess with it. So the goal is basically, so we're going to build a barn in the center of the pastures, and we'll just open a door, open each gate depending on which pasture they need to be in, and kind of go from there. So that's really it there. I don't, like I said, I love the ideas. I'd like to put some of them in practice. It's more just there was no infrastructure here when we bought the place, so it's all been us building it. So the electric fence has come in handy for that. But
Do you have your chickens follow your goats, or do you not need to do that on your property?
we basically, so when we first, I guess backing up, when I grew up raising chickens, we had a very conventional setup, dinky little run, 10, 15 layers, that was it. Um, when we first moved up here, that's exactly how I did it, and I didn't like it. It was um, just a standard. I mean, it was a cheap little Lowe's shed that the guy had bought prior to us moving up here. So I used that. We had tried a chicken tractor while we were living in Kansas City. We were trying at my parents' house still. We tried meat birds in a chicken tractor, and it went horribly wrong. We had a raccoon sneak underneath the tractor
Oh
side
no.
and kill half the birds. And then 2 nights later, after blocking all those holes up and turning it into Alcatraz, it got in again, and we went from 50 meat birds to 18. So ultimately, all that to be said, I think a lot of times these, I'll call them fancy ideas. They're not really. I'm leery of those fancy ideas because of that experience. I wanted to try something new. I wanted to get the chickens out on grass. I wanted to Joel Salatin it up, man, and
Mm-hmm.
it failed horribly. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I've seen it work. It's never worked for us. So I hated putting the chickens back in a house. It wasn't fun. But the first year we were here, me and my dog, between the two of us, we killed 27 raccoons out of the yard. And they weren't getting to the chickens or anything. There was just that many raccoons here.
Wow.
And that's just the yard. Like, I didn't go out of the way to do it. That was just me and the dog would go out there to check on animals right before bed, and there would be raccoons in the yard. So, all that to be said, the first year or two, I thought I had to. I thought that was just how I had to set it up. But basically, we just started free ranging last year. Basically, when feed started going up, it kind of goes back to the whole, the goat value. If I'm spending $10, $12 a day dumping a bunch of food at these chickens, is it really worth the math? Versus the potential of losing a chicken or two because I free range. And so I started free ranging. I just let them all out. We had a really nice pen set up for them. It was pretty big. And I said, I can't afford the chicken feed, so we're just going to free range. So we free range. I don't run them. They still have a stationary coop. I don't run them after any of the goats or anything. They go wherever the heck they want to. Um, it's been huge. Feed consumption is way, way down. I mean, just absolutely insane. We used to probably go through 25 pounds of feed a day, something like that, maybe. We have a fewer
Wow.
chickens. Died of old age. We haven't had a single predation issue in the year that we've been doing this. Um, so we have fewer chickens, but we use way less food. I mean, down to just a couple pounds a day, really. And they seem healthier. I realize that's kind of a subjective thing to say, but they do seem healthier. They run around a little, a lot more. It's fun to watch them on top of that.
Yeah.
I don't really like chickens, but it's fun to watch them free range. So
It is, yeah.
But so that's really it when it comes to the animals in terms of, so we free range them. Honestly, towards the end of last year, we were kind of free ranging the goats. We fenced off the orchard and the berries, and then let them just go to town and figure things out. They didn't wander too far. Again, we never had a predation issue, despite the fact we get neighbors' dogs. And we ended up not having to feed hay into December, despite the fact that we didn't. I didn't do anything special. I didn't have any winter pasture. I didn't pull a Greg Judy and like leave a bunch of paddocks. We just let it go, and they scavenged. So we've had some. I mean, a lot of learning. Again, learning by doing. When it comes to that stuff, initially we did things really conventionally, and kind of learning how to get away with doing something in a different way, something that works for us. Um, so that kind of worked out when it came to the animals.
Very nice. So, do you use any of your chickens or like goat manure in like building up like compost in your garden or anything? Or
Yep. So we do basically the what a deep bedding or whatever for the
Mhm.
chicken house. We don't heat it or anything like that. We just throw a bunch of bedding in through the winter.
What zone are you in?
5B, northwest Missouri. It's I think
Okay.
it's 5B.
Okay.
So we get pretty cold. We usually have, this winter was really mild, but the chickens have been just fine down to -25 for a couple nights with nothing. So it worked out pretty well. It does keep it a little warmer. I don't know how much warmer. I'm sure they'd be happier with a heat lamp, but they survived. So anyways, we every spring I clean that out, and then we keep it pretty shallow in there. And then the goat manure, we muck the barn out, because prior to this year, they spent most winters in the barn,
Okay.
just in a small little lot. The hay was in there, so it was a little more convenient. Um, this year, we put them on one of the little paddocks, most of them, with the exception of one or had babies. So that manure is not going to be quite as easy to use. What Hopefully, because goat manure is not as hot. So the
Mhm.
plan is to take that paddock that's basically grazed or beaten to bare dirt. We're gonna till it up, till in all that poop, till in all the nutrients we got from the hay, and we're gonna try some grains. It's about a quarter of an acre, so we're gonna put in um, corn and that, and try and, well, just kind of an experiment. It's a pretty cheap experiment. Corn's cheap. So we're going to plant corn and see what happens, see if it's
Yeah.
worth basically hard, winter paddock, have them beat it down, have them doing a bunch of the work, have all those imported nutrients from the hay, and see if that's enough to get a decent corn crop. Um, enough. The corn that we got when we went and picked up corn, it defrayed feed fairly well. I mean, so for us, that's kind of it. Is I'm trying to work. I'm basically relearning what everybody already knew, which was, graze it, then you can plant in it, and then let it go fallow. Like, we don't have to do that again. We can let it get back. I can put a better seed, a better pasture seed in there, let it bounce back,
Sure.
and then give it a break and not let it be a winter, paddock for a year or two. Um, which again, I think some of that is just it is relearning. It is learning what works for us. And again, I mean, some of those things, like, you read about them in books, and some of that really does. I mean, it does work. So
Nice. Um, about your free ranging your chickens, would you say that that's one of the things that you've tried and worked well? Was there anything else that you tried
oh gosh, yeah,
like?
free ranging chickens absolutely worked really, really well. It was a huge one. Um, the uh, the goats and the electric fencing was one. Moving them regularly.
How often do you
I
have to move them? Did you say?
It just kind of depends. The more goats, obviously, the more goats we threw in there, the more often we had to move it. It's not a particularly huge. I mean, 300 feet when you turn it into a square, it's not particularly big. And a lot depended on seasons. That was something we ended up learning. I think the hard way. It was
Because
great
you're
because
watching the grass.
yeah, I mean, but we're watching the grass, but learning that like and again, this is gonna sound really silly to some people, but when you got that spring rain and your grass is just growing nonstop, it's like we kept the goats in basically an acre yard and we just moved them all the time. And then we hit late July and August and the grass stopped. And so of course, like it sounds silly to even say that now, but late summer hit, we stopped having a bunch of rain and the grass stopped growing as well. And I mean, we got rain, but it wasn't growing as well. And so I'm sure experienced grazers out there would laugh at that admission, but it just hit me like out of nowhere, like, oh crap, I don't have anywhere else to graze. Um, so that's when we actually started building the first paddock. But that rotation and learning all that was really big. The downside, I think, with goats and using a fence like that is that where I really want to put them is really brushy, and moving those fences through brushy areas is the worst thing in the world.
I bet,
You
yeah.
you want to test the strength of your marriage. You and your wife go out there, you and your spouse go out there and try and drag an electric fence netting through brushy areas trying to get it set up. Oh man, especially trying to do it before work, like, trying to sneak out there right before I was supposed to be at work. That's a tester. It was pretty fun at times. So,
So what would you say didn't work then, other than trying to fit electric netting through brush?
um, the chicken tractor is one I did talk about. I had a terrible experience with that. I don't think we'd try a chicken tractor again. I'd be much more likely to free range even meat birds. Um, what else? We've had all sorts of failures. Well, I
The pigs, yeah.
strongly suggest that people get their hay taken care of before December. That's another big failure this year.
Mm,
Um, it was kind of we just had all of our previous hay sources fell through the cracks, and I just didn't make it a very urgent thing. That's the reason why the goats free ranged. It wasn't because we wanted to. It's because I was an idiot and didn't think hay was a big deal. Um, fencing, being really really serious about the fencing. I our dogs were kind of escape artists, and so I thought if you could make, I could make a pretty good fence because I kept the dogs in. And we have one goat; she will break out of anywhere. And so the amount of frustration involved in keeping a goat that doesn't want to be in there, if you just make the fence right the first time, that's kind of a big deal. That's a frustrating thing. Oh, I didn't really think about how many failures. We have lots. I fully admit we had many failures.
sure, yeah.
Water. I think some of the things that were probably most frustrating. We set up the animals in a place far. We had existing infrastructure. We have it's I think a 100-year-old barn that used to have electricity run to it, and it doesn't anymore. But that's where we decided to set up our animal operation, and so having to deal with carrying water out there and having to go manually break up ice. Um, those are like you don't think about that, and it's my laziness.
Yeah.
But man, it's frustrating. I mean, I think for as far as things that I learned, it's until 100% that the solution you're doing is going to work for you, being very willing to scrap whatever it was, whatever grand idea, and saying, you know what, that didn't work. Let's try something different. We moved the chicken house 3 times before I built a permanent one. Um, the goats, we tried them in different spots, and then we finally ended up settling on electric fence. I think those have been some of the bigger ones. Is
Hmm.
realizing, especially when you watch some of those YouTube videos, and this is a soapbox I get on for a lot of people. You watch some of those YouTube videos, and they have this very they have their way, and it works really well for them, and I'm sure it does. But that doesn't mean it's going to work for me. And so, really understanding that not being set in a certain way, because I wouldn't say that they're like tremendous mistakes, but they were things that didn't go well at all. And the cost of them, not being able to keep a buck in his pen, it ended up, I mean, it was just like a knock-on effects. He ended up breeding goats we didn't want bred, which meant that we had does dropping kids in the middle of winter. So we ended up losing some kids, and then, I mean, so just on and on and on, like that made it more difficult. And I had to run, I had to go out in the middle of the night and check on these pregnant does. I mean, just these little things like that, they end up just really exponentially increasing difficulty. And I think especially for someone like me who doesn't have a lot of experience with it, like those things making an already difficult experience, an already difficult learning curve even harder because of one little thing at the start, and like trying to find those little things to make life easier. So
yeah. No, that's good to know. Good to share like those failures. Like this is where I've failed and had to learn hard from this or these mistakes. So
I mean, I really probably could. My wife would probably be a perfect person to mention. She tends to remember either the successes and the failures a lot more, but I mean both. She's just better at remembering successes and failures a little better than me. I tend to try and at least, just today's a new day kind of a thing, both good and bad. But
sure.
I'm sure she could remind me of a few more ridiculous failures that we've had. As far as I guess one of them, it's not necessarily animal related, but we got up here. It's a 100-year-old farmhouse, and there's no wood burning stove or anything like that when we moved in. And we just kind of assumed that the previous guy really liked money and didn't want to just burn his money in this furnace that he had. That was not the case. We had a ridiculous heating bill the first winter we were up here.
Oh no.
I mean, and we couldn't even keep the house warm. So it was a ridiculous heating bill, and we couldn't keep the house warm anyways. And so yeah, I mean, little stuff like that where you just again assumptions. I mean, just these assumptions about how something was going to work.
So then, what'd you do?
We ended up, so basically we just suffered. We suffered through. I will tell you right now, we had the summer before, even with an air conditioner, we were at about $100 a month. And then in February, the first winter we were up here, we had a $440 electric bill. So 4 times, and it was cold still. It was miserably cold. That furnace could not keep up, and it was like burning. I mean, it would have been cheaper setting dollar bills on fire. So we ended up going with a wood burning stove. I put it in, and it's worked much better. We took out the furnace actually, so we're solely wood heat in the house now. So
that's pretty sweet.
It's worked out really well. So, and we
do you have anything? No, so go ahead.
Oh, we have a bunch of the property's 13 acres of timber and about 8 acres of pasture or brush. So we've gotten given a bunch of wood, so I'll sometimes go to other people's houses and get wood, but I mean, we could do it all here. So that's worked out really well. So it's, I mean, aside from a chainsaw, it's free ish. It'll pay for itself. So,
yeah. So do you have anything unique that you're running on your property or that you're trying to grow or anything like that?
I've done tobacco 3 years now.
It's unique.
So, it's pretty easy, really. I'm kind of surprised more people don't do it. Especially Missouri has really, really low tobacco tax, but obviously not every state does. So I'm kind of surprised more people don't do it. I would say it's probably it's about as easy as growing tomatoes. Obviously preparing the tobacco. But it's really, yeah. I mean, it really is. It really is about that easy. Obviously, it takes some work, and I've been told I'm not a smoker. It was really just for kicks and giggles. I
Okay, because
worked
I
with.
was gonna ask, like, do you smoke it in a pipe or like personal consumption? I don't know. What roll your own
Um,
cigs?
I've smoked it in a pipe, but it wasn't. It was more just out of curiosity. It was something I had read about, and I like a cigar every now and again. So I thought, you know what, I'll just try this. How hard can it be? And it's really not that hard. I'm told it's not great tobacco, so maybe I need to try a different variety.
Hmm.
Um, this was from cigarette smokers, so I liked the pipe smoke that I did. Like I liked that.
Sure.
Um, but that's something we've tried. It also keeps away pests growing the tobacco. The insects
Okay.
don't like it, so it was
Interesting.
kind of a double whammy, I guess you could say. Um, other than that, I'm not. I mean, that's one of the reasons I try and shy away from the label of a homesteader or whatever. Anyways, I'm not a particularly unique. I mean, we don't. I don't think we really do anything particularly crazy. Partially by design. Um, you know, I think especially. I mean, we homeschool our kids.
How many kids do you have?
So we have 5.
Wow, good for you.
So we homeschool them. I work a day job, so if I can learn from somebody else, I learn from somebody else, which means uniqueness isn't necessarily something that I strive for. um I'd rather someone else learn the lesson for me, despite my philosophy of learning by doing. I'll watch YouTube videos and whatnot to learn, but
Right.
yeah, I don't think we really have tried anything crazy really, other than the tobacco. I think my daughter wants to grow some peanuts this year. I don't know very many people that grow peanuts, like small scale.
No, I
So,
just SpongeBob, I think. I've seen grow peanuts.
so we'll see how that goes. But other than that, like I said, I it's pretty normal stuff. As far as unique stuff, we're probably gonna try. So I bought a sawmill um, back in December. It's finally here. I'm building it. I'm actually short some parts, so that's been a little
Oh,
frustrating.
of course, your
Yes.
short parts.
So
It'll be
it's
another 6 months before you get them.
Well, they actually it we were lucky. They're little plastic injection mold pieces that the um, engine raises and lowers on. Um, they shipped me the wrong size, but
Mm.
so I waited 8 weeks for it, and then we were sick the week I got it, so it was pretty miserable. And so when I finally get out there, I go through the first, I get the whole bed made, and then I discover that we're short pieces. So it was a little frustrating, but we're gonna try building our own house here. Um, so that's I guess you could say that's unique. So I'm gonna do all the work on that. Five
Using
kids,
lumber from your
hopefully
place?
from the property. I don't know what in terms of lumber and how it works in other states, but here in Missouri, the big cash crop is walnut, black walnut, and cottonwood. Right now, people make pallets out of. And surprisingly, despite lumber being ridiculously expensive right now, um, nobody else really uses a whole lot of other wood. So my hope is to use some of what we have on our property, and then other
What
people in the
varieties do
community.
you have?
So we have a lot of oak. Um, it's an oak and hickory. Northwest Missouri's used to be oak
That's pretty
savanna.
nice.
So I have some options, but right now, white oak usually is cash lumber, but nobody's really buying it right now, from what I understand, at least here
Hmm.
locally. And there's other options. Most people don't use their hickory, but hickory is something I can make cabinets and hardwood floors out of. Honey locust is actually really comparable to oak in terms of
Hmm.
strength. It splits a little bit, but so the plan is to timber frame. I told you earlier that I couldn't let my father one up me with the dome, so my plan is a timber frame house that we'll
Dude,
build.
I
So
love timber frame houses.
I'm kind of taken with them. So
Man, it's gorgeous. The joinery, like it's just those guys that like really do it. Um, they're just like masters in their craft. Like it's just I don't know, just like ooh, that's
I
kind of
watched
cool.
a who was it? Northman, you know that YouTube channel at all?
I don't think so.
I think they're in Latvia. I want to
Okay.
say they're an Eastern European. It's a guild of people that basically just do things traditionally. And I think the guy that runs it, he's a carpenter. I think it's the guy that runs it. I don't necessarily know all the backstory, and it doesn't help that it's in another country. But he has like a 20-minute video of him making this cabin primarily by hand, um, logging with a 2-man crosscut saw and hauling the wood
Oh
out
my
behind a
gosh.
horse, and then doing all the joinery. And I was really, really taken by that. My wife would probably have preferred that I had never seen that video, but I was really
Probably.
taken by that.
Building your house will take 10 times longer, but man, when it's
Yes,
done, it'll be so amazing.
yes, and I mean, I guess it's me being cheap too, but the goal is to try and stay out of debt for that build. So the point of it would be, we get the mill, and then at least the majority of the things we can source very locally. Keeping consumption down that way, and cheaply. So that's the
That's
plan
pretty
there.
cool.
I hope so. I hope so. It's kind of a bit of a gamble. Learning how to timber frame. I mean, the goat barn that I was talking about, that's going to be kind of the first project.
Oh,
First
so kind of
project
get
right
your
there.
feet wet in it. Okay, this is how I like this type of joint or whatever.
Yeah, or
Like,
just I can do this, and with the goats, if the barn falls down, it's at least it wasn't me and my kids kind of a thing. And the
yeah,
beauty of it, I mean, ultimately, if it turns out to not be something that I like, or it turns out that I don't have nearly as many uses for the mill, it's an asset that can be sold. So it's not a
right.
it's I mean, I'm not it's different than if I just spent, that money on part of the house build. This way it's a good that I can sell later. So we'll find out. I'm sure I'll post about successes and failures about that. But that's probably
Looking
going to
forward
be
to
this.
seeing it.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be interesting. So
Speaking of plans, what's your plan with the goat herd? You kind of touched on it earlier, kind of build it up a little bit and then sell more, I'm assuming.
the hope, basically, we're gonna kind of dip our feet into that and see. I've touched upon it on some posts, but it's about $4 a quart for goat milk at Sprouts in locally, and that's pasteurized goat milk. And so my thought is to just try and find some people.
Do you
That
pasteurize or do you just
we do not. So
okay.
I would assume. I mean, it's legal here in Missouri to sell farmer direct raw milk, so I don't have to. I won't be worried about any kind of legal hurdles.
Okay.
We thought about doing a herd share. Basically, we're just going to try and dip our feet in it and see if it's worth it. Um, I don't necessarily. I guess that's my wife has her own little side hustles, and obviously I have a job, and so I want to make sure. Because at the end of the day, that's not entirely the focus. Like, I'd love to make money, and if maybe we can time it so some of the kids, all our kids are really young. They're all, I think, well, I don't think, I know. The oldest is turning 6. Um, so,
Oh wow, just pumping them out. Bang, 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 bang.
well, we did have a surprise, but then we also were in the middle of adopting one of them, so they're all
Oh.
all way down there. So yes, it does look a little crazy, but they're not all biological. My poor wife was not pregnant quite that much. Um, but my dream with some of those businesses is to be something the kids can run pretty much by themselves,
Sure.
as they get older. So have one that's responsible for the dairy, one that's responsible for the eggs, have one that's helping me with the mill or whatever. I'm not sure the timing's gonna work quite right for all that, but we'll see. But if I can make money on it, I'm absolutely game. Um, One of the downsides with dairy that's different, obviously, with eggs, the milk doesn't keep as long. So with gas prices
Right.
going up, I don't drive to the city. I only drive to the city twice a month. Um, so delivering it to people that would actually be interested in it will be a little difficult. So we're still trying to work all that out. If I'm selling a quart for $4 and gas is $4, it takes a lot of milk to be worth going. I mean, I guess it could pay for my trip to the city, but so we'll have to see how that all works. But the goal would be to
Yeah,
keep growing it, get to the point where we can start trying to sell milk. If that doesn't work, then we'll just take a step back, start selling some of the Dolines, and not expand the herd past that point. But I guess like anything with any of those small businesses, there's a high likelihood that it'll fail. And we've tried, both my wife and I, we've done some entrepreneurial type things and failed at most of them, with the exception of her current endeavor. So we're kind of used to it, trying to make sure that we don't get all our eggs in one basket, and we're willing to, we have the ability to fail and not be too stuck into a business idea. So we'll have to see what happens with
sure.
the
Be a
dairy.
little flexible and see
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
looking promising. Sure, I gotcha.
So we'll see there.
What what has been the biggest challenge in homesteading, or in your case, just providing your own food that you faced? What's the biggest challenge?
Honestly, it's probably trying to live the balance. I think I mean, it was a topic of conversation on Twitter this last week amongst some of our mutual acquaintances, that that homesteading, it's fake. Um and I don't necessarily agree with trying to balance the normal's such a weird word to use it, but trying to make sure, like, I work 40 hours at least a week, making sure that we're making progress on the things that are important to us, um, in the homestead, or all the other things that accompany that. I talked about, I do almost all the work around basically everything here. So if a car breaks or whatever, so I mean, I have to juggle all those things on top of a homestead. Um, and so basically, and it goes back to just being overwhelmed when we first got here. It's really trying to take manageable bites at all of these projects when you're living a double life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, People used to grow their food, and that was a full-time job. And we have the benefits of mechanization and all these other things that we can do. But at the end of the day, it still used to be a full-time job. And so being reasonable with yourself, and just saying, you know what, this is good enough, or this is what we're going to accomplish this year, and it seems silly, and it doesn't seem like it's very much, but this is reasonable, because that's truly was the hardest part, was trying to find that happy balance, um, between those two lives, kind of a thing. I mean, I work IT, and then I go out and I'm hoeing up a garden patch. Like, that dichotomy can be really hard to balance. And especially
Right.
with friends and family that, they were used to Josiah the city. I played video games and board games with friends, and, this is pretty an average urban, suburban dweller. So trying to
Yeah.
balance all those things is hard. So I think
Yeah.
that's probably the hardest thing about how we choose to live, is trying to make those balances, and making all that work for the family.
Right. There's a thing going around on social media right now. It's like people feeling burnt out on doing this, that, and the other thing, and whatever the little audio overlay is. It's like, just do more things that matter is what the key is. Like, don't try to do everything. Just do more things that matter. So, and I like that. I like that.
And I think, I mean, to some degree, that's where that whole the whole vertical monopoly versus the horizontal. It's like, I could do pigs, I could do cows, I could do all these things, but, like, despite the fact that goats are really frustrating, at times, picking, I like goats, so we're just gonna do goats. Does it solve every one of my problems? No, because we still buy bacon, we still buy sausage. Um, does it solve problems and make me happy, and is it fulfilling? And do I feel burnt out? no, that's, it's a good thing, and it gives me some flexibility, and so very much like what you were saying is picking and choosing the things that really are going to matter to you, or the things that are really important, and being willing to be flexible about the rest, and not get burnt out, because we absolutely did that first year. It was hard, and
A
learning to
lot of
try and
people
scale
quit
back.
after stuff like that. They're just like,
Yeah,
"Whoa,
no,
this was way
absolutely,
too much.
absolutely.
I'm out." Yeah.
And it's hard, and I mean that's one of the things when I see anybody post social media, or I have my wife's had a couple of friends that have kind of started down this road, and I'm like, listen, pick one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just pick one thing.
One thing a year. Yeah.
Do it, learn. If you're really feeling good, you can pick two. But don't do three. Like, three's too many. Like, just pick two, get into it, and just get really good at those two things. And then move on to the next thing and add one or two things again. Because otherwise you'll get overwhelmed, and then you'll get to a point where you say, you know what, this is a good number. This is a good amount for us. This is a happy place. This is enough work. This is enough commitment. I'm good at this. I like these things. We're gonna stop here. And I think that's a lot more reasonable, especially if you have to live those two lives. If you have to work a day job and do this on the side,
Right.
it's reasonable.
Yeah. So then, what would you tell people that wanted to get started in farming or homesteading or just providing their own food?
You can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it, I think, is the big thing. There's been a lot of people, um, especially friends of my wife, that she was pure city girl, wasn't particularly interested in this stuff until we really got started. Now she's an absolute pro. So, item one, if your spouse is really into it, or really, you know, that's an important thing. But that being aside, they all just automatically assume that this is how I grew up, and it's absolutely not. All of these things are things I've had to learn. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. Again, just pick that one or two things that are important to you, things that you think you're gonna like. Because again, like, I didn't visit any place that, honestly, the closest I'd been to a goat. I mean, goats were at a petting zoo, like at the Missouri State Fair. Like, I didn't have any experience with goats. I didn't have zero animal husbandry experience. I helped with sheep. When I was a kid, we would round them up and hold them for a sheep shear. So I mean, a little bit of exposure, but nothing. I mean, I didn't grow up around it. Those were
You'd see them at the
all,
state fair and be like, "Whoa,
yeah,
those are huge balls."
right. It was nothing. I mean, those were unique enough experiences that I remember, because they were odd. It wasn't a normal thing. Um, so yeah, I didn't have anything, and I still don't really know anybody around here that has goats. I mean, I know I've seen them, but learning, it's hard because of the time commitment, but animals know what to do. And so it's not particularly hard keeping animals. If you can keep a dog, you can keep a goat. Um, Milking goats is a little bit of a different story, but if you can keep a dog, you can keep a goat. So none of it's particularly hard. It's not intellectually challenging or anything like that. So I just tell people to do it. It's not there's no big hurdle. If you're willing to do it, if you're willing to put in the work, you can figure things out. And especially, I mean, I wasn't on Twitter at the time when we first got into it. I was not on any internet sites,
Right.
really. There's a lot of opportunities for people to learn on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube, um, and how to do these things. Um, so you can leverage that. You can leverage that. You can learn from somebody in a completely different state. Um, you know, that can handle your unique setup. And that's really cool. And it's something I didn't really leverage until very recently. But you can, and it's not rocket science. It's really not. So
What
I think anybody
I
can do it.
Yeah, what I like about the homesteaders and farmers and whoever, they're so willing to help. Um, even just even just this talking, almost everyone said yes. Just like, yeah, I'll talk to you. What do you want to talk about? It's just like, well, just farming, homesteading, growing food, like stuff. And so they're just like they're so willing to share. It's really amazing. It's such a great community. Um, yeah, it's very cool. People are cool.
One of the other things, and truthfully, I mean, a lot depends on where you end up landing. But the community here has been really, really good. Obviously, it's a lot more conventional ag, but especially when you get to talking to some of those old people, um, they know how things were done 100 years ago, and that's, in my opinion, that's kind of the first target point. Is you don't have to do anything crazy. Like, try things pretty conventionally. Just make it conventionally 100 years ago, not conventional now. But like one of the guys, when we shelled that corn, or when we got that corn, I was talking to him about it, and he was like, "Yeah, I used to raise pigs just on corn I would pick up out of fields."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Well, how do you shell it? Because we've just been like twisting it with gloves on." And he described it, and then he ended up wandering back into his barn later that day, and he found a sheller um, that we ended up using. So I would say again, like, sometimes you might assume that that person doesn't really have a whole lot of experience with it, but um,
They
they
might
may
have
have
dabbled.
tools. Yeah, or they might have tools that I bought that mill, and one of the deacons from our church, he was like, "Well, I have a mill. You'd need like 150 horsepower Cummins because it's a 32-inch, circular saw blade thing." But so I mean, he
Mhm.
he grew up doing that though. So like he milled the old way. Like that's what he grew up doing. And so these things were like, I wouldn't have assumed that. I wouldn't have known that. He's a conventional ag farmer. Um, he's a great guy, and if I wanted to know about conventional ag at all, that would be a great source. But in addition to all that, he had a bunch of information that I would have not assumed he had, and he was willing to talk about it all.
Yeah.
So those things. I mean, it is kind of a universal thing. People like. I think people don't really understand just how much people like helping other people. I mean, what it boils down to. So I mean, the internet's proof of that. There's random strangers offering advice about all sorts of things that, and a lot of it's good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and most of it's also well intentioned too,
yeah,
um, even if it's wrong.
I've seen some wrong stuff. So, but yes, most of the time they're, and it does go back to some degree to some of those things where like their experience that may have really worked for them.
Hmm.
I mean, it could still be wrong, horribly wrong, but it also worked. So how wrong could it be, especially for them, right?
That's true.
But by and large, I mean, there are some people that you're like, well, you probably should give advice. You probably shouldn't give advice about that. But then there's some people where you realize they're like a guru of their topic, and running into those people, especially on the internet or even locally. I mean, there's that guy with the pigs, like I was talking about, that he raised pigs. Knowing, um, he was talking about all the different little things about raising pigs and all that stuff, and I was like, this is better than watching a YouTube video. I've got this guy that lived
Absolutely.
it. He raised it. This is awesome. I mean, I think he's got to be what, 80 something. So he, doing it as a kid in the 50s. I mean, it's a wealth of information because that's pretty much that time period, like I was talking about, that conventional ag. Those are it's a decent starting goal is that
Hmm.
time period. So learning from those folks, especially while they're still here, big deal. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, um, that does it for all my questions. Do you want to tell people where they can follow you, what you've got going on? Because did you say that you're going to start a website or?
my wife has an Instagram, and I'll end up posting it on Twitter. Right
Okay.
now, she originally it was for kind of all of her side hustles all together, and so this she'll end up spinning up one just for farm related stuff. So I'll end up posting that.
Okay.
And that'd be a good way to see the more artsy side of things. You're more likely to find some practical things from me than you are anything fun. Um, but so Twitter, it's @inventive15 is my handle, but You can find me by Josiah Young as well.
I'll have links to that as well. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so we'll have an Instagram and a website up probably within the year. I realize that's kind of a long time frame, but we don't really have anything to sell right now, so that's pretty much more just getting the word out. But yeah, I kind of post a stream of consciousness stuff, but you're gonna see the attempted a goat barn. Again, just watching some YouTube videos and a book, and I'm gonna go out there and try and build a goat barn, timber frame, and you'll see some more goat stuff. And I'm pretty big on the math side of things, so I've had a couple posts like that, and there's some more coming down the pike as far as what's the value, how, is this worth it from a financial aspect, is this worth it from a time aspect, kind of things. I don't necessarily say a whole lot of unique things, but really it's just more like anybody can do it. So I don't have a lot of plugging to do. Like I said, I don't even sell anything, so I can't do it. I can't do a whole lot of plugging, but
that's all right. You're selling knowledge. Is what you're doing right now.
I'm giving it free of charge. So and
there you go.
Amateur knowledge. So
hey, we all had to start somewhere, and somebody's behind me. So, but hey, I appreciate your time tonight, and
it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, me too. And so, yeah, for everyone else, you can follow Farm Hop Life almost anywhere. I'll have a link in the description. So, see you later.